I'm here to introduce my course on Immanuel Kant in honor of his 300th birthday, which would have been, or which is, next Monday, the 22nd of April. We're beginning this Saturday, the 20th of April at 6 p.m. UK time, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you've ever always been meaning to read Kant, then now is the time to act and enroll in my course. It's not just about an interest in Kant that you have, but if you want to understand the trajectory of modern philosophy, which for a reason is called post Kantian philosophy, at least on the continent, then you must understand and grasp the true scope of Kant's project. Kant does not write an epistemology, as especially in the Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-American world, it is often believed and proclaimed. No, he does something much more profound than write a harmless epistemology. He revolutionizes the form of thought itself in such a way that formal logic, the principle of non contradiction, absolutely dominates. This is something that John Locke and David Hume were wrestling with. And it ended up with David Hume ultimately giving up in a grand skeptic gesture, thereby summoning the demon of nihilism. So Kant sees this trajectory and he wants to bind being and thought together again, and he does so with transcendental idealism. And this is exactly what we'll be discussing. So we're looking at transcendental idealism in the Critique of Pure Reason, the so-called first critique. That will be the first 6 lectures and seminars will be devoted to the Critique of Pure Reason. We will then devote one seminar and one lecture to the Critique of Practical Reason, because practical reason has primacy, as Kant says. So practical reason will already be discussed during our sojourn, our journey through the Critique of Pure Reason, which begins this Saturday. So this is a course that is on Teachable. I show you the inside now. You need to enroll now, and the anything to do with how to enroll, etc., I will get to in a second. The inside of the course looks like this. So take a look. We'll first begin this Saturday with a discussion of the prefaces and of the introduction. So we'll look at why Kant sees and how he sees that metaphysics has become a battlefield, as he calls it, and what that has to do with formal logic and the principle of non-contradiction, where Leibniz and Wolff and others went wrong. We will then look at what Kant has referred to as the Copernican revolution. And this Copernican revolution can only be fully understood when you understand that Kant indeed writes a logic rather than an epistemology. Considering the Critique of Pure Reason and epistemology will forever make you blind to the true scope of the project and why Kant is such an earthquake. If you're interested in any philosophy post Kant, be that the immediate aftermath, Fichte, the German Romantics, the Schlegel brothers, for example, or Schelling and Hegel, Schopenhauer to a certain degree, even though he completely misunderstands Kant, Nietzsche even, certainly, of course, as I mentioned, Hegel, and absolutely for certain Husserl and Heidegger, and of course the Neo-Kantians, and as well as today accelerationism. You must understand Kant and you must understand the transcendental logic. By the way, if you have any questions specifically on the course, then you should ask the question. I'll get to them at the end. So, the first lecture devoted to the prefaces, the battlefield of metaphysics, and the Copernican revolution. The second lecture and seminar, and the way we will do this is I will first lecture for about 45 minutes. then we send you off into uh, a breakout session for about 15 minutes. And once you come back, we'll have a 1-hour group discussion that I lead. So first lecture, then a group work, and then we do a 1-hour group seminar session. We record both sessions so that if you can't make it to all of them, you can listen back to the recordings. If you can make it to all of them, of course, you can still listen to the recordings and you have access to them afterwards. So after the first lecture, we'll go to the transcendental aesthetic and the logic. We will look at time and space and what it means to consider time and space as transcendental concepts, transcendentally ideal and empirically real. We will then consider the very notorious remark that thoughts let me look at the English for a second. Sorry. Thoughts without intuitions are empty, intuitions without concepts are blind. So this is usually understood as Kant taming the understanding in favor of sense perception. That's not the case. There's something else going on which has to do with transcendental logic rather than with a combination of rationalism and empiricism. Again, a misunderstanding that's very widespread and that will forever bar you from accessing the true Kant. So we will look at time and space and this specific moment in the transcendental logic on the notorious remark that thoughts without intuitions are empty, intuitions without concept are blind, which has to do with securing knowledge or securing the production of knowledge through scientific models over in a moment of dominating nature, quote unquote, because nature by herself no longer gets to show anything of herself by herself in the first critique. Kant, however, does not absolutize this. That's important to know. So he's not, he doesn't absolutize the technical, practical world access because practical reason has primacy. We will then go on to the phenomena and noumena, followed, of course, by the transcendental deduction of the category. So we will look at a justification transcendentally, which means before any experience, to put it simply, of the categories, of the concepts of the understanding, how they apply to the manifold of appearances. We will then continue with the power of the imagination and the overall and the transcendental dialectic of reason and the antinomies of reason as well. And that should then be the final 2 lectures in for the critique of pure reason. By the way, if you have any questions specifically on the course, let me know and I'll get to it. So once we're through the first critique, we will look at those passages in the second critique that stress the primacy of practical reason so that you will become aware of why Kant has to set up what he sets up in the first critique in order for practical reason to take primacy and have, to use a Platonic term, the idea of the good leading the charge here still. So again, Kant does not absolutize the technical, rational world access, as for example does Spinoza. Now, after the seminar and lecture on the second critique, we will move on to the critique of the power of judgment. And here we will look at specifically what Kant says about nature, genius, and the sublime, but of course also his introduction of the word spirit, Geist, into philosophy as a technical term of art. Because Kant, it's dawning on him that he has, in a sense, abandoned nature, or that he has exiled nature to the noumenal, anything that could show itself of itself. So das Erhabene, the sublime, takes the subject out into nature again. And there is here, of course, especially in the third critique, a lot that Schelling and Hegel will pick up on later on. So, and maybe you can already see why phenomenology had to return to the things themselves. Zurück zu den Sachen. Because for Kant, things as they are in themselves and what they could be by themselves is not what can be accessed, and he must set it up in this way in order for formal logic to hold. But this is not an arbitrary decision by Kant. This is something that there was a build up to this moment through the British empiricists, especially with John Locke to Berkeley, who denies the existence of the external world, who goes as far as having to do this, having to reduce being to being perceived as the percipi, in order to establish the reign or the domination of formal logic of the principle of non-contradiction. And with Hume, genius that he was, he shows the absurdity that happens when we apply formal logic to experience. So Kant radically revolutionizes what experience, how to think experience in the first place, so that subjectivity does give rise to objectivity. So, and I said before, if you have questions specifically on the course, let me know and I'll get to them at the end. So let me now point out that I've been running this online academy for the past 4 years. I put out a lot of videos almost every week, sometimes several every week. This is how I make my living. So by enrolling, you support the continued work here that allows me to share the knowledge that's usually hidden inside academia, not even there, with you and the rest of the world, whoever stumbles upon this. So feel yourself a patron of the arts when you enroll. When you click on the link to enroll, this will lead you to our partner website called Teachable. You can see that it is the Halcyon Academy. That's my academy. And on here, you may choose from 3 different study options. Now, you find all live lecture and seminar dates here. Beginning this Saturday, we're meeting twice in April, 3 times in May, and then 4 times in June, so 9 times in total. There will be a reading week in mid-May, so that you have some time to breathe and read Kant on your own. You'll find a couple of quotes from Kant. If you don't have time for, let's say, at least 4 or 5 of the seminars, then the self-study tier is the one for you. You get access to exclusive video lectures and, of course, the audio files as well. I'm writing lectures for every meeting. There's about 4,000 or 5,000 words each. Those will be uploaded as PDFs that you can print out. If you can make, let's say, at least 4 or 5 of the group seminars and live lectures, then this is for you. You can learn in a group. There's 9 seminars that I lead. At the final seminar, you get to present your own work. Plenty of examples on my channel here. You, of course, have also so-called lifetime access or indefinite access, etc. And as I said, 9 group seminars. We meet every Saturday for 2 hours. And as I said before, every enrollment helps me keep the light on and the work here going. This is how I make my living. So if you are very committed to Kant and you maybe have some sort of, maybe you're setting up a Substack at the moment, or you're trying to work something out in Kant because you're working in another field, or so I've worked with well, professors of mathematics, playwrights, actors, lawyers, people who work in tech, etc., who, if in any way you think Kant can help you, for example, when you're trying to understand science from maybe a way in which you've never thought of science, because probably you think of science as highly empirical and just looking at what's out there, and not so much in terms of what it actually is doing, which is to torture nature, to present it with the results that it wants before, that it posits before anything shows itself by itself. So if for any reason you think you could benefit from additional private tutorials than the philosophical dialogues, that's for you. Now you could also just use the payment plan here. This is for the seminar tier. That's 3 installments, gives you the same access as this one. So this would be it. You can also see here on the enrollment page, which I'll link to again here, you find a list of lectures, and I'm only changing this one here. I will look at the power of the imagination, I have now decided, rather than the architecture of reason. The architecture of reason, in a sense, we will see emerge in front of our eyes as we go through this series of necessary positing, which is what the first critique really is. Not concerned at all how it is that we know, but rather something else. So this all is on here. We'll look at practical reason, and then again, the sublime nature and genius in the third critique. So when you click on there, this is now open for enrollment. We are closing enrollment tomorrow. So if you want to enroll, the time is now. Here's a beautiful quote from good old Kant. From such crooked wood as man is made, nothing perfectly straight can be built. This is why practical reason must take primacy. And of course, you can see here also that Kant is rather, shall we say, critical of a blind belief in progress. Now, obviously, if you have questions also on Kant's ethics, more broadly speaking, the categorical imperative, etc., this is, of course, this is not the main topic of the course, but the categorical imperative will be mentioned, and we can use some time of our discussion to focus on the categorical imperative, of course, as well, especially once we get to the second critique. Given that I'm lecturing live this time, there's a bit more leeway, there's a bit more room for you to make, if you're in the seminars, for you to make suggestions also what could be included the next time. And we can always come back to something. We won't be plowing through the entire book and every single page. We'll be looking in a very isolated manner at some of the most important sections and draw out what's really going on. So again, as I said in the beginning, when you look at this notorious quote that gets thrown around everywhere and all the time, which is this one: thoughts without intuitions are empty, intuitions without concepts are blind. The usual story is Kant here gives not primacy, but grants sensuality, sense perception, and sense data, in a sense, its rightful place through the intuition. But that is not the case. In fact, we will see that what Kant here establishes, because this is in the transcendental logic, this is not in the transcendental aesthetic when he says this. This is in the logic. So we have to be aware that what he says here is that in order for the transcendental Copernican turn to work to establish objectivity in the way that he wants it to be established, in some sense, the scientist, because this is really who he's addressing, has to be blind, has to be blind to what could show itself by itself. I would be surprised if you had heard this anywhere before. So there is a certain blindness that Kant advocates for. And the price that we pay with this binding formal logic again to experience is a high one. Kant wants to avoid dialectics by all means. The price is that if we stay stuck on this level, which to a large extent the so-called natural sciences have done, then we do not ever get to a non-constructed actuality. And perhaps now those of you who've read some Heidegger and Husserl, etc., will begin to appreciate why it is that phenomenology wants to return explicitly to things themselves, zu den Sachen selbst, den Sachverhalten, we could also say, how things relate to each other. So there is a constructivism, really, in Kant that we need to be aware of, but it isn't one that is not ontological. So he's not making ontological claims about anything. Objects are not given for Kant. Objects arise from the application, the transcendental application of the categories to the manifold of appearances. An object arises to representation and through the forms of time and space. So objects aren't given. Things in themselves can never be accessed. We don't even know whether they really are. That would be saying too much. We have to act as if they are. So we can see also that there is not, he doesn't write an ontology at all. So, and of course, he's trying to address so many issues all at once, not just his time, his contemporaries, and the build up to the battlefield of metaphysics, because he sees at the heart of it metaphysics itself, the distinction between the sensible and invisible or intelligible as a fundamental issue that has impeded secure knowledge for metaphysics. So metaphysics can, to give you an example, can, to use Leibniz's monadology, can draw up, can construct these wonderful coherent models, as today perhaps some physicists do. But once this is related back to spatio-temporal intuition or experience, a dialectic begins to emerge, or to put it more crudely, more bluntly, the entire model, in a sense, breaks down. So if you are genuinely interested to begin to understand not just the philosophers that come after Kant and what they respond to in him, most obviously it would be with Hegel, whose science of logic will only ever make full sense to you when you've understood that Kant writes a logic in an epistemology, and why it is that Hegel develops and unfolds the categories immanently rather than just positing them, at least in the beginning, then Kant is for you. But also if you want to challenge how perhaps you think of science and of our of scientific models and model making, etc., then you need to grasp Kant, and especially those of you who dabble in such stranger, almost meme-like movements as accelerationism. Accelerationism is based on Kant, but it's to a certain degree a misuse of Kant, because accelerationists conveniently forget or ignore that practical reason takes primacy. But what they get right is what occurs with transcendental idealism in the first critique. And to say this again, as I said before, we can fly airplanes and drive buses and cars, etc., because of transcendental idealism. Because it is through that transcendental logic, that logic of positing a Setzungslogik, that we can posit before any experience. No one had experienced flying a spaceship. And as you know, building airplanes only began to fly to build a flying object only began to work after we stopped imitating birds. So it has nothing to do with mimesis, and this is a provocative claim and statement, and I won't go into it too much here, but we will discuss this in great detail at the course. So once more, as there are no questions, let me show you. If there are any, you should put the questions in the chat now, then I can get to them in the end. So 9 weeks, 9 meetings in total, 8 lectures, 8 regular group seminars, 1 final seminar where you present your own work. We begin this Saturday. We're closing enrollment tomorrow. We're meeting twice in April, 3 times in May, 4 times in June. I lecture for the first 45 minutes. Then you're sent off into a breakout session, which is off the record. The lecture is recorded. The group discussion is recorded. So 2 hours in total every Saturday. If you don't have time for the seminars, then self-study is for you. And every enrollment guarantees that I can continue the work here, which means that I put out hundreds of videos, and for anyone who stumbles upon them, can delve into philosophy. If you have time for the group seminars and the live lectures, then this one is for you. 9 group seminars that I lead, and you get to present your own work at the end. And if it's good enough, then we publish it also. Or if you really want to dive into Kant and transcendental idealism and transcendental logic, then book the 5 additional private tutorials with me, also over Zoom, of course, where we meet 5 times, best case every 2 weeks. And maybe you're writing a longer piece, maybe you're already setting up your own project that has to do with something adjacent to Kant, actually is on Kant. Then this is for you. Maybe you're working on a project to do perhaps a business or scientific project where you think you might benefit from this. So, or if you'd like to, as they say, spread the cost and just use the payment plan, this is for the group seminars. So, if there are no questions, I'd like to thank you very much for listening and would like to invite you and implore you once more to enroll now or be sorry forever, because I'm teaching this course this year and I will not be teaching it for many, many years to come, if at all ever again. So far, I have not been able to teach many of the courses again, to be honest. So if Kant has always been on your list, now is the time to get serious and read the critiques, but read them in such a way that you will not find anywhere else, and also not find at most academic departments where, for some reason, Kant is an epistemologist, which he wasn't. So again, thank you very much. Share this with anyone interested in Kant and post-Kantian philosophy more broadly, if you could, please. And I hope to see you uh, this Saturday. Thank you very much. Enroll now or be sorry forevermore.